Whalawhalahi atu he whanongonongo mai mo e whalataha mai he whiawhi tēnā koutou katoa. Tā lofalava, malo e lelei, kia ora ana, ni Sambula Venaka, Māori. Thank you for joining us. My name is Colin Tukui Tonga. We'll get underway shortly. I'll give a bit of context in a minute, but our minister from Niue is online, and in usual Niuean custom and tradition, the right thing to do is to give her an opportunity to greet you all. So, Minister Sonia Talangi, Mamale Māori.
Hauilahi, se Dr. Colin, tukua te tau whalawhalahi atu ki tau tōru usini kua whalataha mai he mga honei from all corners of the world. Kaue ki atua ke hana whalawhanoa mo e takitaki anga mawharako me ke tau tōru ke whakarataha mai pihi. Ke tūtāla ke he mena ke tau ngahua mahuinga nei, Indigenous data sovereignty. So, as Minister for Social Services and providing oversight and support towards Taonga Niue, our language and our culture, I'm also doing the USP Wangahau Niue certificate, and more in the spaces of education, in the spaces of digitalization in all sectors. Indigenous data sovereignty is an emerging and really critical area that I think needs much more attention than what it's being given at the moment. I understand there is confusion between Indigenous data sovereignty and data sovereignty, depending on who you speak to. So I'm very grateful to the panelists who are providing their time and their expertise with us today. Whauilahi mahaki. I really appreciate it so that we can grow awareness and that we can all come together as Niuean people, well, not just Niuean people, people that are passionate about their cultural identities and their heritage. I have said in the education space that Indigenous data sovereignty is a matter that has to be addressed by the region as a whole and not just by Niue, because we share common words, we share common practices. And I suppose if you look at the commercialization of kava in New Zealand and in the United States, kava is a ceremony that is dear to those in Tonga and Fiji and Vanuatu and other areas. So it's one of many examples that I can provide, but I'm a huge advocate, and I look forward to the experiences and insights that are shared with us today. Thank you again so much for your precious time and your contribution to these webinars. I really appreciate it. Kaulahi Oitulo.
Thank you, Minister Oitulo. A bit of context before we get going. Earlier this year, we had a conversation with colleagues from Niue about research. Research purposes, research conduct, etc. And a number of issues came forward. One of them was ethics. The island does not yet have a ethics assessment framework. So the last webinar we had a couple of months back was on research ethics, and that was a very good session. The second issue is data sovereignty, which is why we're here today. The whole purpose of all of this is to inform, assist, support our friends and family and colleagues on the island, take forward a research agenda that's appropriate and reflects and aligns to the values of the people on the island. The session is recorded for your information, and whilst it has a Niuean flavor, there are people on the call from different parts of the region, and I note a friend and relative here from Tokyo. Welcome again, Jason. We have fantastic speakers for you today. I suggest we hear from them and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. We're fortunate to have some of the Māoridom's best brains in the business here. And we'll get underway with Professor Tahu Kukutai. Professor Kukutai's Ngāti Tipa, Ngāti Mahanga, Ngāti Kinohaku, Te Aupōuri. Professor Kukutai lives in the mighty Ngaro Wahia, I'm told, and where she was raised, and is a devoted mama to 3 beautiful tamariki. Tahu completed her PhD in 2010 at Stanford, and now Professor of Demography at Te Nira Institute of Population Research at the University of Waikato. She also serves as co-director of Ngāpai, or Te Maramatanga, Aotearoa's only Māori Centre for Research Excellence. Her research centers on Māori population dynamics and Māori data sovereignty. Founding member of Te Mana Raraunga, the Māori Data Sovereignty Network, and the Global Indigenous Data Alliance. Tahu is an elected fellow of the Royal Society Te Aparangi and a life member of the Population Association of New Zealand. Now, I invite you now, Professor Kukutai, to share with us your kōrero this afternoon. Thank you very much. And again, welcome. Thank you.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā rangatira mā, tēnei te mihi atu ki a koutou i runga i te reo karanga. He iri tēnei no Ngāti Tipa, Ngāti Mahanga, Ngāti Kinohaku, Te Aupōuri, nō reira tēnā rā koutou katoa. Whakalofalahi atu, greetings to you all. Greetings, Minister. Thank you for the warm welcome and the introduction, Tā Colin. It's really good to be here. So today I've been invited to talk about Māori data sovereignty, about the importance of data sovereignty for our aspirations as tangata whenua, and about moving from data dependency to data sovereignty. And I hope some of this will be useful to you as you progress your own initiatives for Niue and perhaps wider Pacific regional data sovereignty. And I'd also like to acknowledge the great work that's been done by my colleagues in the Pacific Data Sovereignty Network. And I guess I'm coming to this kaupapa as a wahine Māori academic at Te Whare o Waikato, as a practitioner in my own community, but also as someone who's advocated for system change in this space for some time, particularly with Stats New Zealand, our national statistics agency, and the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. So I guess for me, regardless of the pōtai or the hat that I'm wearing, this kaupapa is really about finding ways to put Māori data in Māori hands so that we can be the ones that benefit, both now and in the future. So I think that's pretty simple, and I like to keep it simple because I find that people can engage with it if we sort of put some of the jargon behind us and remember what's important. So Māori data in Māori hands. Okay, so on that note, oh, there's a picture of my dad. When I'm doing presentations, I always like to have a picture of my kids, but today I've got a picture of my dad. He's at the National Library. He's poring over a really massive whakapapa or genealogical table that we found there when we started one of our projects back in 2018. So I'll come back to why I've got a picture of my dad, but I thought I'll just pop him there at the front. So why should we even care about data? I guess the short answer to that is because we now live in an age where data are absolutely everywhere. Nearly every aspect of human life, our lives, is being digitized. All kinds of devices, from Fitbits and phones to buildings and drones, can track and analyze and store and share massive amounts of data. And the capacity to link it, to integrate it, use it and reuse it, from different sources and for different purposes has expanded rapidly. And in most instances, there's no explicit permission that's sought or consent that's given to enable these data linkages and reuses to occur. So whether we participate by choice or not, with consent or not, we as individuals, as whānau, as communities, we're all part of the data revolution. And as communities, it's really critical that we have a well-informed understanding of the challenges and the opportunities that all of this presents and how we want to respond to them. Excuse me, I've got a cold, so I'm going to have to blow my nose from time to time. So in Aotearoa, there's lots of hype about the value of data and, you know, that can be unlocked and unleashed and the power of the data. And for me, when I hear these claims, I ask myself 4 main questions. Whose data are we talking about? Under whose control? According to whose values? And for whose benefit? And when it comes to Māori data, the government here in Aotearoa is still pretty much operating in a vacuum. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Māori data sovereignty and data governance, but there's no policy across government, including the public service, and there's no legal protection specifically for Māori data. What that means is that in a practical sense, there's all sorts of decisions that are being made about Māori data, about what data to collect, where to process and store it, how it gets used and accessed and shared. But these decisions are being made largely without transparent and accountable practices and policies that genuinely reflect Māori priorities and values and concern. And I think this is where Māori-led initiatives on data sovereignty and data governance have much to offer. So at this point, I'll just pause and go over some definitions so that we're all on the same page. And the definitions here come from the Māori Data Sovereignty Network, Te Mana Raraunga, or TMR, which is a national network of Māori with some interest in data. And you can find their principles and lots of other resources on the website. There's the URL at the bottom. And so the TMR definition of, you know, what the heck is Māori data? It's a fairly broad one, and it refers to information or knowledge that's digital or digitizable, that is about us as Māori, that is from us, our language, our culture, our resources, and our environments. And it's Māori data regardless of who controls it or where it's located. There's a lot of Māori data that is not currently in the possession of Māori communities. But it's still Māori data, and it includes raw and processed data as well as metadata. Māori data sovereignty is an extension of our sovereignty as an Indigenous peoples, and it refers to the inherent rights and interests that we as Māori have in relation to the collection, ownership and application of Māori data. And data governance is related but different, and governance is really the principles, the legal instruments, the policies and the frameworks through which we as Māori can exercise or try to exercise control over our data. So I think useful to have some of those key definitions there. I should note that there's increasing global recognition of the importance of Indigenous data sovereignty and data governance. I don't have time in this poto talk to list all of them, but I think one important one is the UN's Special Rapporteur on the Right to Privacy. And I've highlighted in the slide some important passages from one of their reports on big data and open data. Just noting here in that report that data are a cultural, a strategic and an economic resource for Indigenous peoples, that existing data and the data infrastructure fail to recognise or privilege Indigenous knowledges and worldviews and don't meet our current and future data needs. And the rapporteur in that report really encouraging governments, but also private corporations, to recognise the inherent sovereignty of Indigenous peoples over data about us or collected from us. So I think that was a really important statement from the Special Rapporteur. One of the things I think we do really well as Māori, and I think perhaps for communities in the Pacific as well, is if there's a problem that affects us as a people, we try to come up with solutions. So it's one thing to define the problem, that's step one. Then we need to take more steps, and that is, what does the solution look like? And that's really been the case, whether it's language revitalisation with kohanga reo and kura kaupapa, and it's certainly the case for Māori data. So there's a lot going on in the Māori data space at the moment, and I'm just going to talk about 2 examples, and I'm sure Andrew will have more. So the first is the Māori data governance model, and that was published in 2023 by Te Mana Raraunga, and that's the independent trust that carries out the data work streams on behalf of the Data Iwi Leaders Group of the National Iwi Chairs Forum, which was the tribal forum. And I have the privilege of working on this model with a group of colleagues. And just to note as well that we had some help from the First Nations data governance strategy team, because that international collaboration and sharing and learnings is really important. So prior to designing the model, there was a lot of consultation across Te Ao Māori and across agencies. So we had a lot of information and insights to draw on, and just to acknowledge that. So this one pager is just a high-level snapshot of the key elements of the Māori data governance model, which can be found on the TKR website really easily. I don't have time to go through all the model in depth, but I just want to share some key features. And so there is an overarching vision, tuia te korowai o Hini Raraunga, which came from some of our tribal leaders, and that's really around our data for self-determination. And it's this high-level vision that enables hapu and iwi and Māori organisations and communities to pursue their own goals for cultural and social and economic and environmental well-being, and to address inequities. And beneath that are the desirable outcomes. And that's the crucial, I guess, the data for good part. So what does data for good look like? It means that we have data that supports our whānau and our families to flourish, that reaffirms and strengthens our connections to each other, to identity, to place, to our reo, te reo Māori. And there's a range of outcomes there. On the left there are the 5 values that really frame the whole model, and those values work together to guide data decision-making and practices. At the centre is the one that's really important, and that is put Māori data in Māori hands. And this is really important because there's no point having a data governance model if it continues to keep Māori data out of reach. There's the second one in the top left is nurture data as a taonga, as a treasure. You know, data holds our knowledges and our stories, and it is a taonga and should be treated as such. Use data for good. That's a no-brainer. Data can help us make good decisions. Be accountable. There's relational responsibilities that come with this taonga, and transparency and accountability are really key. And decolonising data ecosystems. So we need, about stopping the practices that exploit and extract our information. And then there's the 8 data pou, or data pillars. And I'll just go over to the next slide. So these are really the building blocks that represent priority areas of action. And each data pou, and there's 8 of them here in the model, really defines a specific area of data governance. So you can see there's data workforce, infrastructure, collection, protection, access, sharing and repatriation, data use and reuse, data quality and system integrity, and data classification. Each of these 8 pou has their own section in the model with guidance on what to do, some examples of what good practice looks like, what not so good practice looks like, and links to resources. So it's 70 pages, there's a lot in there. It's a bit of heavy reading. So if you don't want to read 70 pages, a group of us developed a simple Māori data governance audit tool, which takes the 70 pages model and really crunches it down to 2 pages. And you can apply it to your data set or project and assess each of those data pou against criteria to see if they've been met or partially met or not met. And in this journal article here, that's the URL, we assess the New Zealand COVID Tracer app against the Māori data governance model using that audit tool. and found that the app only met 7 of the 24 criteria. So it's quite a handy tool. Check it out if you're interested. I'll end here because time is running out real fast with an example from my own hapu, Ngāti Tipa. So Ngāti Tipa are one of the 33 hapu or sub-tribes of the Waikato Tainui Confederation. The wider confederation has around 80,000 registered members. In the 2023 census, Ngāti Tipa numbered about 3,400, but we're small, but we're mighty and feisty. Our people are all over Aotearoa, all over the world, and our rohe or our homeland is in the area known as Te Puaha o Waikato, which is where the Waikato River flows out to the Tasman Sea. Since 2018, we've been developing our own data sovereignty kaupapa, growing our own hapu research team, developing our own digital repository and databases. So our first project focused on the data that was most precious to us, which is genealogical information. And these are all the data workshops that we had in our different marae. We have 3 marae in Ngāti Tipa. It's been a really massive exercise in data repatriation and digitization and integration, taking fragments of us from public repositories all over Aotearoa, bringing it back to our marae, to our own space, for us to make sense of under our own tikanga or customary protocols. We've sourced information from missionary and colonial censuses, genealogies, historical newspapers, archives, land court minutes, maps and survey plans, birth, deaths and marriages, registrations, photographs, and oral histories from our elders. And what began as a 3-year research project with modest funding has become a collective's life work. And using open source code from WebTree software, we've worked with a data scientist to create a bespoke genealogical database that has more than 800 Ngāti Tipa ancestors up to 1900. And why genealogy? Because it's a taonga for all of us, and it's a taonga that has the potential to benefit us as individuals, as whānau, and as wider collectives. So I'm just going to whiz through this next part. Oh, my slide's not moving. Because I can see that I'm getting over time. So having collected all of this data, we've created our own database and hapu digital repository. And we've got a simple layer cake approach designed by our technologist, Vanessa Clark. And at the bottom is a digitized data layer. That's all the information that we've collected over the years. The next layer is the pātaka, which is really the physical container for all of our data, and all of the data is stored on a server in Aotearoa owned by a local company here in the Waikato. The tikanga layer is really about our customary protocols and how we translate that into a digital environment. So it's really about access permissions, who gets to see what, under what conditions, and these have been rigorously tested with our whānau and our elders, so we've got clear lines of accountability back to our whānau. And the final layer is the applications layer, which is web-based, and we're developing our own website and had the help of a cryptographer based in Australia to make sure that it's all secure. So there's a lot going on in that space, but none of it would be possible without the support and the wisdom of our Ngāti Tipa Ruruhi and Koroheke, our elders, many of whom are shown here and who have passed on since the beginning of this project, moi mai aku rangatira. And just to end, we've got a lot of resources that were developed from this project that are available for others, which may be of use. There's one here called Hapu Data Sovereignty, Tips for Getting Started. It's sort of a step-by-step guide to doing things, starting small, but we can still achieve really meaningful things. And just to note as well that we're starting a new online postgraduate certificate in data sovereignty and data analytics next year at Te Ngira, which I can make more information available later on. So ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa. Thank you, and I will stop sharing and tuku the rākau over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Tahu, it's impressive. Plenty here for Niue and Pacific whānau to think about. Commendable work and leadership wisdom that you've taken. By the way, taonga in Māori, te reo Māori, and in the Niue language is exactly the same. And Justin will talk later. They have a department back on the island that looks after our taonga, all the important parts of our culture. So thank you so much. We will move on, and hopefully we'll come back to you when your two co-speakers have been through their kōrero. Thank you so much, Tahu. Andrew, that you're here. Andrew and I go back a million years. That's how old we are. And I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your experiences and wisdom with us. Mr. Andrew Sporle is Ngāti Apa Rangitane Te Rarawa. Andrew is a social epidemiologist and the managing director of INZ Light. I'm not sure that I've pronounced that properly, Andrew.
Insight.
Insight.
Yeah.
He's an honorary associate professor of statistics at the Waipapa Taumatarau University of Auckland. With a strong focus on equity and Indigenous data justice, Andrew works across Aotearoa and several Pacific nations. He has recently published new methods for the detailed analysis of Pacific outcome data, advancing statistical tools that better reflect Pacific realities. A founding member of Te Mana Raraunga, the Māori Data Sovereignty Network, and the Global Indigenous Data Alliance. Andrew brings over 30 years of experience. So we welcome you, Andrew, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'll hand over the floor to you now. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Con. Kia ora hui mai koutou, ko Andrew Sporle tōku ingoa, he uri hau Ngāti Apa Rangitane me Te Rarawa. Ahau. Rarangatira mā tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mihi kia koe e te rangatira e tā Colin. We do go back a long way, in the 1990s when I had hair and it wasn't grey, and I was probably about 20 kilos lighter, but hey, that's life. And it was an honour and privilege working with Colin, because what we were doing, we were setting up against some opposition, the Pacific Health Research Funding System. And there was a bit of mutual collaboration between the Pacific part of the Health Research Council and the Māori part of the Health Research Council that has its links back to Hohua Tutanaihe, because Hohua said, he was an interesting man, Hohua. He was one of the whakapapa experts for Te Araki Nui. And he said, we have a tuakana tēnā role here, and it is our job to support our elders and to make sure that we move together as Pacific peoples, Indigenous Pacific peoples. That said, my talk's going to be a little bit different from Tahu's. She's given you the as only Tahu can do, a fantastic summary of where things are at and what awesome things are happening. I want to put a bit of a future lens on this. One of the reasons I moved into the private sector is that, well, first of all, I found that a certain university wasn't very good at managing research grants, but also I wanted to be able to get a little bit more flexibility and dynamism and affecting change. So I want to talk about some of the strategies we can do to actually affect some change with regards to Niue and data sovereignty. So my talk is going to be uncharacteristically short for those people who have heard me talk before. And we'll just see if we can share screen. Okay. Great. So I do almost all my work through a company called Insight Analytics. We're an Indigenous-owned company, as Colin said, working in the Pacific, in New Zealand and Australia, a little bit in Europe, and I seem to be spending now lots of my time flying around the country. But part of it is about sort of generating systems and policy and practice that can be reused to implement change. So when you get old, you tend to sit on a lot of boards and governance. sort of bodies, and part of that has actually informed what I want to talk to you about today. So this is about what can we do in practice, and some of this is built on some of the scar tissue of 30 years working in research in this country, but some of it has also been built on some recent successes. At the moment, we've got three key themes that are happening in terms of research data governance. We've got data sovereignty in research in Aotearoa. We've got data governance issues. We've got how do we inform change? How do we use data to inform change? Because one of the things we're supposed to be doing by gathering data is actually helping make a better future. And that means that we also need to have a really strong outcome focus. Now, part of the problem in Aotearoa at the moment is that we don't actually have the data systems and tools to do that. And that issue is writ large in the Pacific, because you end up with issues of scale, issues of workforce, issues of funding, issues of resource and sustainability and environmental safety. So why is all this important? It's important because one of the reasons that we're collecting all of this data is to actually improve outcomes. But if we're collecting data in a way that is actually making our future worse, or compromising our values, or compromising our kids' future, or devaluing the taonga that we've gathered, then we're not actually going to be doing that, right? We might be thinking that we might have some information for decisions, but the cost of that has been part of it, compromising our future and compromising our sovereignty. So when we're talking about Indigenous futures, it's Indigenous controlled futures, and being able to get data for self-determination. And that means two things. That means being able to gather data ourselves and store it, but also access data that other people have from us or about us, and how we can use both of those sources to determine our own future. Now, that's a little bit tricky at the moment, because that's not how data systems were set up, right? Colonial data systems were set up for harvesting data, and we can still see that in the way that certain funding requirements from certain global funding bodies require harvesting of data from national accounts. But also we can see that that this is actually going to require some change. And that change has to start with data governance, because data governance means you're sitting at the decision-making table. You're the ones making the decisions, right? Because you're governing. So if you're making the decisions, you can say, these are our values, and these how we want them embedded in the actions with regards to data. And it means you can actually advocate and inspire, possibly even control the building and sharing of examples of good practice. Now, I'll come back to that, because that's actually absolutely essential about where we're going to go. And the governance will also determine safe allies. We can't do this alone. It's one of the reasons why the Global Indigenous Data Alliance started so quickly, was that it realized that as separate individual peoples, right, we can't fight this battle alone. We've got lessons we can share, and resources we can share, right, and capability that we can share. And in doing so, we're much stronger together. And this is one of the themes I want to make for what could possibly be a future for Pacific data sovereignty, including but not exclusive to Niue data sovereignty. And that requires we've got to think about the hard stuff now. Right. We have to think about what we want from data governance, and we have to think about what we want from a data environment, a safe data, sovereign data environment. In terms of data governance in the Niuean context, it's actually a real challenge. It's harder than here, right? Because you've got to think about what works within Niue, what works with regards to the compact with the New Zealand government and the obligations that comes with certain aid agreements over and above the governance structures and constitutional structures. What happens with regards to Pacific neighbours, including umbrella organisations like the Pacific Community? How does a data governance model work there? And then how does it work for researchers? What I want to suggest is that the researchers is actually the easy one, and it's a really good place to start. And it's a good place to start because lots of really successful Niue people are already working in that environment, and you've got somebody in Tākolin who actually set up the funding system within the Health Research Council. But once you start thinking about governance models, then you're actually talking about how do we embed values in a system in a sustainable way. So we're not talking about a particular project. Any project is about creating an example for others to follow, right? Projects should not, a particular research project or a particular development shouldn't be regarded as just a standalone thing. It should be a beacon to say, this is an example of how to do it. There are lessons to learn here. Let's follow them. We have real challenges in the data environment, though. And how do we actually create a sovereign data system in terms of collects data in a safe way without giving it to Google or giving it to Amazon, storing data in a way that you actually know where it is and you can access it and share it with other people in a safe way. Then that might mean, right, if it's confidential data, you may not want that to go over a particular internet node that may or may not be surveilled, right? So that includes moving data, analyzing data. A lot of tools data is only really valuable if it's used, right? And it could be used in terms of what Tahu describes as whakapapa data. It's kind of its use as a foundational essence of identity. But if we're talking about using data and analysing it, how can we do that in a way that is safe, with tools that are safe, right? And realise the value of what we've actually got in a safe way. Do we have the tools? Do we have the people? And that then brings us to the issue of how do we reuse data? There's a lot of data that's already there. Data is really, really, really expensive to collect. And so there is value there's quite often value in reusing data, and that is particularly in the case of New Zealand government data because they've gone to the effort, energy and expense of actually collecting data. So what is there that we can actually use? In the Pacific, there are other sources, right? There's some of the other sources, for example, the routine fisheries collection data that is massively underutilized, but could be absolutely a gold mine for understanding what's happening to the Pacific marine environment. And that means that if you actually start reusing data and collecting data, you're now talking about data archiving, and how do you do that safely? Because we actually need to start thinking about governance and data systems in tandem, because you can only really have effective data governance, right, if you've got control of the data. If somebody else has control of the data, you may make a decision about it, but you can't affect that decision. You can't implement it. So, and possessing the data, you then actually have the ability to control it. You control the boundaries of the data, what happens to it, and who can access it. As Tahu alluded to, there's very few data sovereign environments in New Zealand. We actually have a government department in internal affairs whose initial policy was store everything overseas because it's cheaper. Right. And so a lot of government data, not all, but a lot of New Zealand government data is actually stored on global cloud networks. In terms of research, this country spends used to spend about $1.8 billion a year on research. We do not have a national data archive. Right? We do not know where the research data goes. So it's all up to individual researchers or their institutions. And so what happens there is that it's really hard to establish what good practice is and good governance because we haven't got a single entity, but it also means that we're not actually able to realise the value of the data. And if anybody's gone to try to find some old data sets, especially with regards to Pacific data, and I'm thinking in particular of the Tokelau study, it's gone. Right? Because there's no single safe place to store it. We're relying on the goodwill of the universities, and if it's in the universities, then they have the governance structures. They have control. There are community models, and Tahu has talked about the exemplary community model in Aotearoa. that is without peer. That is and that's a really good example to follow. And that report that they've done is a really, really useful starting point. One of the things that is happening on the horizon, though, and that is getting to change this, is the discussion about sovereign artificial intelligence. As somebody who sits on several sort of international or global AI policy groups, then actually I think I'm down to 2 now, which is great. Our big concern at the moment is that the artificial intelligence industry is in data harvest mode, because they've harvested everything they can that's in the public domain, and they're now after private domain data. And they're really interested in Indigenous data, because guess what? There isn't much of in the public domain. So we have to be really careful there. So if we're going to talk about data tools, what are our big concerns, right? Do your data tools copy or relocate your data? If you see these services say, oh, we'll store your data automatically. We'll give you a free backup, right? Read the license agreement, and you might find that there's something pretty scary there about their ability to claim ownership or use rights of what you've just handed over. So unfortunately, at the moment, a lot of the tools that we routinely use, right, including my company, we're sacrificing data sovereignty for convenience and simplicity. So what we're doing is going, okay, this is a nice, easy to use tool, but in the process, I've got to upload my data or hand over my data, or it will be copied somewhere by default. And so we actually lose control over it. There are solutions, but these are emerging rather slowly. And so the solutions are in open source tools, right? And when we build an open source tools, it's about sharing our examples for others to follow. Now, this works really well, but it does require more setup time, sometimes money just in terms of paying human time, but it's lower cost in the long term. Right? We're actually doing this now, right, with a couple of organizations here in New Zealand, building open source exemplars that somebody can go, this is an example of an open source data system. I can just take that because it's open source and copy it and set it up on my own system. It is one of the big things that we actually have to think about in the Pacific. And that starts with data storage. How do we do data storage for Pacific nation states that is safe and secure, right, and backed up? And sometimes in an environment that could be slightly hostile. So what we're suggesting is have a look at some of the data tools. R is actually come out of Auckland University. It's free software. It started as statistical software. Now it's data management software, and it can actually, there's some packages in there that help build data systems. Insight is a point and click version of the statistical arms of R. My company now supports that. It will remain freeware and open source. There's Nextcloud, which is a way of setting up data systems so that you can actually have storage over there, access points somewhere else, but it links it all up together without actually having to move the data. So you can actually, which is fantastic. And you've got some other tools like Hadoop that are now being routinely used. This is the future, but the problem is, how do we learn about it? What I'm going to suggest is a really rapid way of effecting change is just do stuff, right? And one of the great things that Niue has got to offer is leadership. Here's an opportunity to take the lead and declare what are the expectations with regards to Niue data. We did something similar with the Roeka Mangai, which was the Māori directors from the National Science Challenges. We just sat down and wrote it, and we published it. And very quickly, it got picked up by ethics committees. It got picked up by funding bodies, to decision makers about, who would fund research as the guiding principles for what looks good with, in this instance, Māori data. So this is how we embedded Māori data sovereignty really, really quickly in the research, funding, and ethics system in Aotearoa, because we just front-footed it. We just said, this is what it looks like. Building on the work of Te Mana Raraunga and Te Mana Raraunga as well. And when you see good practice, it's a matter of supporting it and holding it up and shining a light on it and saying, this is how it's done. But in the routine data collection things that we do, it really insist on good quality data, right? And say, you know, if you're going to be collecting ethnicity data, then this is how you do it. If you're going to be doing work with Niuean data, this is how you do it, and actually have some quality metrics. But really importantly is start building the next generation of data literate Niueans here in New Zealand and Niue and wherever. Now, although I'm a sort of a statistician, I'm not advocating for people to be training up lots of statisticians or even official statisticians. But what I am advocating for is building a data literate body of future decision makers, so that you have, whenever there's somebody sitting around a table making decisions, they know what good data is, right? And because they're sitting around that table, they have the ability to make a decision supporting good practice. So it's about building that data literacy, that community data literacy, that means that the garbage that went before is no longer acceptable and would no longer even get off the starting grid. The other thing to do is link up with some really other good things. First and foremost, by linking up with the research funding system through membership of assessing committees, doing reviews, and the ethics committee system by maybe presenting to them or having members sit on ethics committees, you will change practice really, really, really quickly. Right? And once you change practice, then that can be adopted and picked up by other people. Then, of course, there's the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, which is the umbrella organisation of the Indigenous data sovereignty movement organisations in the various countries. They are our sort of representative on the national stage at the Research Data Alliance, at the IEEE, those kind of big, at the UN. They are our umbrella organisation. So come in under the umbrella and join us. Then the other thing is to start looking at who are some friendly allies in the open source development network. Who are some of the people who can actually do some of this stuff, right? And want to do different. And there are some companies in New Zealand like Catalyst Cloud who are really, really keen to work in this area. They're not driven commercially by it. They just want to do cool, useful, safe stuff that is innovative. And they want to be seen to be supporting really good data practice. And finally, I want to come back to the Pacific community. With statistics and development, we've got some people in there who are really keen to help develop some exemplars that can be rolled out or picked up by other Pacific nation states. And I've had some discussions there where they're really keen to look at ways of simplifying data processes for nation states in a way that reduces the burden, but also improves data sovereignty. So that's a discussion to have as well. So that's me. There's some initial steps there. I've focused on what can be done now. And I'm going to end with just one small plug for the paper that Colin mentioned. I've got a fantastic staff member called Nicole Satherley, who produced a report on how to do detailed Pacific nationality outcomes using official statistics here in New Zealand. That report is freely available, and just as an aside, she is now supervising a Niuean honours student in statistics who is looking at doing a master's using Niuean statistics, but there's no stealing just yet, right? She's an awesome wahine who's going to be a real game changer. And so we've managed, the South Pacific community have been generous enough to say we'll find her some Pacific data for her to do her postgrad studies on. So it's about building that next generation, and we've got some real Niuean superstars coming through the system, and it's really pleasing to see. Well, that's enough from me, and I'll hand the rako over to the next speaker. Kia ora, tā Colin.
Andrew, thank you so much again. You've raised some very practical challenges there for us all, but thank you. It's a pleasure now to introduce Justin Kamupala. Justin was born and raised in Niue and currently Solicitor General and head of the Niue Government Crown Law Office, graduate of Deakin University in Melbourne. Justin has built a distinguished career in the public service. He has held a range of senior roles within the Niue government, including Crown Solicitor, Private Assistant to the Prime Minister, Deputy Secretary to Government, Secretary of Justice, and Executive Director of the Niue Public Service Commission. He's also currently serves as Acting Niue Public Service Commissioner. Mr. Kamupala brings extensive legal and governance expertise to his leadership roles and remains a committed public servant contributing to the legal and institutional development of Niue. Palofla here to Justin Whakawela Mahau ni tukumai. I'll hand it over to you, Whakawela.
Whakawela te kia kai ma Dr. Colin lai whakawe kua ka whanatahe dotor ke maha nei ke tutalai do whikau mahuinga nei ki la tamai ha dotor tau i loa anga. Ka e whakalwharea tu whoki ke tau toro ois ko whanataha ke whatutalanga nei e whewhi nei, whakalwharea tu ke mtoro ois. Mua tu ni whoki ke tau porotu ne kua whanataha mai ma dotor. Ko tau porotu e kua Andrew Sporle mo tu whene ko Tahu Kukutai lai whakawe kua ka oroa dotor ma nei ke tutala tu mana mahuinga nei. First, I'd just like to express my appreciation and gratitude to you, Dr. Colin, for inviting me to participate in this webinar this afternoon. And also like to thank our two experts who are joining us today, Dr. Kukutai and Andrew Sporle, who are with us this afternoon. And also welcome to all our guests, all those who are tuning in to listen into the conversation we're having this afternoon. I will be speaking, I suppose, somewhat generally in terms of some of the where we're sort of at in terms of edo Niue ke Māori. As no expert in this particular area, and it's not an area that we've had much experience with today. However, my understanding in terms of data sovereignty, my understanding is that it's based on the principle that data collected, stored or processed in a specific geographical location or jurisdiction is subject to the laws and regulations of that location. In our case, Niue. So I suppose this means that all individuals, researchers, organizations that collect or gather data must comply with the legal frameworks of the country or region where the data resides, which can include aspects related to privacy, security, and the protection of that data. Additionally, it emphasizes the ability of individuals and researchers, enterprises, organizations who collect data to control and safeguard that data, especially in terms of personal identifiable information of individuals and other relevant data within the jurisdiction where they operate, so that such information does not fall into the wrong hands, whether for criminal purposes or other unauthorized purposes. So data protection to build confidence. The concept of protecting data, specifically personal identification information, is not new for obvious reasons. However, and as far as having specific legislation in place to address these issues in Niue, we haven't got that far at this point in time. Recent work undertaken by the Niue Trade Office on the development of a digital trade strategy has identified that there is a need for appropriate data protection legislation in Niue. In terms of trade, the basis of having data protection legislation is to build trust, provide assurances, and build confidence for international partners and consumers so that any data that they may provide to a new entity in the course of business or transaction, this data needs to be managed in an appropriate manner. And if it is not, then they would be able to seek redress for any such breach. In this digital age, the growth of online businesses and transactions ensures that data will be exchanged at some point. So it's important that relevant safeguards are in place. In many respects, people use whatever systems that are available to facilitate transactions without thinking much about the underlying issues that enable these systems to work. I understand in the more developed countries, Australia, US, Canada, France, EU, etc., they have specific legislations in place to govern and protect their citizens from misuse of their data derived through business transactions, the relevant business or commercial transactions. The relevant legislation in New Zealand, as I understand it, is the Customer and Product Data Act of 2025. Until we have our own legislations in place for the protection of data gathered in Niue as a result of business transactions, we may have to rely on the relevant legislations of jurisdictions of where that data may be stored. Alternatively, as a matter of best practice or policy, entities that collect or gather data in the course of their work or business activities need to be better informed as to how or where they store data received in the course of business to ensure that such data is secured appropriately. It is noted that data needs to be stored somewhere, whether this be within Niue or in the cloud or an offshore data storage facility or server. The aim of any legislation would be for it to be to have extraterritorial application and apply to that data regardless of where it may be stored. However, there would be challenges to that on issues such as data security, cross-border data flows, and the enforcement of local privacy regulations in the country of where that data may be stored. In terms of the cloud, I can only speculate, but suppose the more established jurisdictions may offer more advantages to undertake such actions, which would put local applicants obviously at a disadvantage. In terms of Indigenous data sovereignty, I understand that there has been an increased call for more recognition for Indigenous data or Indigenous data sovereignty. As data sovereignty is seen by Indigenous peoples as playing a key role to self-governance and identity. Having Indigenous peoples controlling their own data is a way to empower them to maintain their identity and to enable them to better reflect their interests, values, and priorities. Having the power over their own data, Indigenous peoples will be able to decide which data gets disseminated to the public and what does not. Data sovereignty in relation to Indigenous groups can also be viewed under the lens of health data, as it is collected and stored by respective countries for research purposes. I note that Niue is a small, isolated population which could have certain traits or genetic compositions that not be apparent in the larger, more diverse communities. So it could, it is specific to us, but it could be of some value to someone else. However, I understand that many Indigenous groups today are reluctant to share health data, and with justifiable reasons, due to a history of exploitation and improper handling of their data, as well as their data being historically used in ways that they did not consent or agree to. The UN General Assembly formally agreed to adopt the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This declaration confirms that Indigenous peoples have the right to control their own scientific and technical data, including the ability to protect and maintain their own human and genetic resources. In terms of data sovereignty for research, in terms of research undertaken in Niue and for the protection of data derived from this research, unfortunately, we do not have comprehensive protections in place that would apply to any form. To date, research undertaken in Niue has been undertaken through authorizations granted by Cabinet and certain government departments, primarily on the condition that the data derived from such research must be shared with the government. It is noted that the government does not want to make it overly difficult for researchers to undertake research here in Niue, as there are many helpful things and better understandings that can be derived from such research. However, the current practice may have been a suitable method to deal with research activities in the past. However, going forward, we will need to determine its suitability and appropriateness. A key question is, how do we deal with research being undertaken in Niue in a more comprehensive manner, so that issues such as rights, benefits, benefit sharing, derivative works, acknowledgements, etc., can be addressed. So we'll need to investigate the options to determine whether this be through specific legislation or policy to address the shortfalls in the current practices. However, as noted, I just note at this stage that we have the Tahu Niue Act of 2012. This provides protections relating to traditional knowledge and expressions of culture. And possibly this could be used as a model. However, although we have this legislation in place, to date, the legislation has not been tested. And as we've had no cases, we haven't prosecuted any cases to determine the strength of the legislation in relation to any breach of these provisions. In conclusion, we acknowledge that in this digital age, the protection of our data or data generated in Niue as a result of research or commerce is essential. The best course for Niue to take at this time, I suppose, would be to undertake a review of how we deal with such matters and to determine the shortfalls, and then develop and put in place specific policy, legislation, or measures to protect our data as much as we can. And finally, the Niue public should be better informed of such issues so they may be able to appreciate the implications and the relevance of issues such as this, so that they may be able to articulate their specific concerns so that the government can put measures in place to address them. I'd just again like to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to address you this afternoon, and happy to take any questions as may come up later on. Thank you.
Well, mahaki, Justin, for that contribution and updating everyone on the situation on the island at the present time. So as you're thinking about your questions, we have time, folks. So you've heard three fantastic presentations, starting with Professor Kukutai telling us, I suppose, giving us a background of data sovereignty and their experiences in with her people. And we've heard from Andrew, so you want to take more control of your data, what might you want to think about and how might you go about it? And then, of course, we've had an update from Justin. So your hand up, I should warn you that I can't actually, I'm technically challenged. So I can't see everyone, and I need my friends to tell me if someone has got their hand up. Alternatively, put it in the chat. We have some time to go through these issues. Professor Kukutai, your presentation was fantastic. I'm curious about how the kaumatu, or the community, all your elders have reacted or responded to the project that you outlined for us. something that I'm sure people in Niue, as they're thinking about their options, they might be considering how how older folk, our elders, have responded to the project that you outlined for us.
Yeah, kia ora, thank you. Oh, look, nothing would happen without them getting on board. So, you know, the step one was to go to the marae and actually to seek their endorsement, really, for the mahi. Because if they didn't agree to it and see the benefit and the value of it, it just wouldn't have happened. It would have been a non-starter. So, you know, and right from the get-go with all our gatherings, and I think for that first project, we had 12 marae-based gatherings. Our kaumātua were there for every single one of them, and like so enthusiastically engaged because we were sharing our genealogical information, and that's, you know, that's information that is super interesting to our whānau. We were so lucky that we were able to undertake oral history, I guess interviews with our kaumātua. We had quite a few in the late 80s and the early 90s, so that was just you know, precious kōrero and knowledge from them. We actually wrote that as a team as a journal article that got published about survivance and about the continuity of our hapu identity through the stories of our kaumātua that they shared. And, you know, it was the most anxiety-laden peer review process ever, because we gave the article back to all the elders, and then all their mokopuna and children were reading it. And we just had to make sure that everybody was comfortable with it, because they didn't want anonymization. They wanted their stories and their kōrero attributed to them, because they wanted that as part of the legacy. So we had to be real careful. But it's, you know, we've had all ages as part of building up our Haukainga workforce, our local workforce. We've had undergraduate students involved. We've got a PhD student. We've had a master's student who was in her late 60s when she started. So we've got all ages. It has to be an intergenerational approach, because when you're dealing with genealogical data, which is our most sacred and important information, we want to make sure that our whānau at all ages are going to be good kaitiaki and stewards. So, you know, whether they're teenagers or whether they're kaumātua, everybody has a skill set and something that they can contribute.
Sounds like their peer review requirements are far worse than academics, Tahu.
It was more meaningful.
Are there any questions? Okay, we have one here on the chat that I've just missed. Question, where are we? Thank you for your presentation. An ongoing dilemma in our Indigenous position of concerns data po number 4. Tahu, please, have you co-designed a code of protection or something similar to address how Indigenous stakeholders may address sustained protections regarding the issue of intellectual property, misappropriation, unethical other? Tahu?
Yes, really great. That was a really great question. I was listening with keen interest to Justin's kōrero about some of the frameworks and in Niue as well, and with some of the gaps and some of the strengths. In short, we don't have intellectual property rights and Māori intellectual property rights protection in a comprehensive way in Aotearoa. The Y262 claim, of course, took many years to come to fruition, and nothing's really been implemented to give comprehensive protection of Māori intellectual property rights. We did a research project. We had a Māori lawyer who specialises in IPR working on that project. Her name is Linnell Tawhirihuria. And she basically came to the conclusion that what we really need is a sui generis Māori data sovereignty law, or a bespoke Māori data sovereignty law. It won't get any traction under this current government, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the foundational thinking for what such a law might cover at the time where it might become a bit more palatable. We've also done some research into whether the Privacy Act has code-making powers, and whether a Māori data code under the Privacy Act might afford us some protections as well. So at the moment, there's basically nothing, comprehensive, that protects our data sovereignty. There are some mechanisms that we can try and push through. It'll be really challenging in this current political environment. And that's why I think some of the Flax Roots initiatives, like our community-based ones, are really important in the meantime, that we just don't ask permission and do things ourselves. I do think one of the strengths that Niue has is that you're not living in a colonial settler state. So you can exercise your mana in ways that are really difficult, challenging for us in a colonial settler state like Aotearoa.
I wish you were right, Tahu. Colonialism is like an octopus.
Yes.
You don't actually need to be in a situation like Aotearoa, but the colonial tentacles still reaches out to the beloved motu. Anyway, thank you. One from the minister, and I'll direct this to you, Andrew. Minister Talangi says, thank you for all your presentations. Noting World Intellectual Property, WIPO, and the Berne Conventions, do these still hold value at a time of AI and digitalization?
They hold value in terms of they're aspirational. Right? The issue is they're now almost impossible to enforce. Once somebody has your data, and especially they can pretty much do whatever they like with it. And as I said in my talk, I believe that the AI industry is an active data harvest mode. And once it goes into their system, there's no trace, right? You might see some footprints going in. You might know that they've harvested your data, but it's just in their machine somewhere, and they are getting value from it. This is actually the subject of some interesting court cases at the moment, but that's going to be a really hard fight because the richest industries on the planet are the data industries. So, yes, I think it has some guidance in terms of asserting values and being aspirational. But I think if we're in a situation where somebody has harvested data and it's in an AI model and it's therefore impossible to extract and others are actually gaining value from it, then it's going to be virtually impossible to use. The only real protection is a secure data sovereign system where we're not actually giving data away in the first instance. This has enormous potential impact for Indigenous intellectual property, especially in the Pacific, where we have countries actively harvesting data already and looking for things, especially health data. We're looking for conditions. In the Pacific, we have a combination of pretty good health data, population health data, and some pretty bad health conditions. That information alone is worth absolute gold to the health AI industry. And they're actively looking in Aotearoa and other countries to see what data they can access, and in doing so by saying, oh, we'll provide you free storage, we'll provide you with a free AI tool, but part of that is actually handing over data. So yeah, I don't think we can rely on goodwill compliance anymore. The only way is to keep ourselves safe.
Thank you, Andrew. Here's a curly one. Someone, Justin, and I'm going to ask you this. The question relates to, I have noticed that some people just come to Niue and take samples without any consultation or approval from government or village councils. I watched one group took water samples without permission. Well, I've been following the rules and waiting for the process to go through due process. I would have thought that should not happen, does not happen. Or am I dreaming, Justin?
Yes, yes. Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, yes, it does happen occasionally, now and again, and we sort of, and if we're lucky, we hear about it. But probably there are a lot of times we don't even know what's going on. But yeah, I'll be naive to say that it doesn't happen. It probably does, more often than we would like to acknowledge. But yeah, it's just one of these things that, I mean, it comes back to our people too, in some respect. We're all very accommodating. When people come up and they ask you things, and I suppose it's just our way that we just like to accommodate them if we can. And sometimes they don't really appreciate the implications of doing such, being so accommodating. But yeah, it does happen occasionally. So that's why I think we probably need better policies in place, even legislation if need be. But and processes that people coming in to undertake research should follow. And then in addition to that, we then need to educate our people. We've had people come in and gather research on weaving and then go away and publish books in relation to that. And, I mean, this is all their information that they've taken away and using it for their benefit, which the people who have given it to them have no, don't derive anything from it. So again, sometimes we are the victims of our own generosity, I suppose. I just think we need to be a little bit more enlightened, I suppose, and not be so naive to those visiting and asking for information. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Tahu has had to slip out, unfortunately, people. So we'll just look at a couple more questions with Andrew and Justin. Here's one. Thank you for your fantastic presentation, such an important part of overall sovereignty. In the health space, lack of data for our people makes it so difficult to know where the help is needed. Andrew, probably for you, any iwi collecting data around immunization status, etc.? A very specific question.
No, I'm going to tread very carefully here. There is some local data collection. Personally, I believe this is the way to go. And it is some of the things that you'll begin to see emerge, I believe, in the new remodeled kind of whānau order rollout. Because, say, for the Auckland-based commissioning agency for whānau order, they are working directly with the iwi partnership boards. So we're beginning to see local-driven data collection, but local-driven data use being actively talked about. I think that's a really, really good thing. And you don't have to look much further than Niue and Raraunga or on the Cook Islands to see the impact of actually having local feet on the ground, well-informed local people on the ground in terms of vaccination strategies. So we could learn a lot from how the Pacific have been doing that. We don't yet really have the data systems for it. It's going to come back to the data systems thing again. And I think that's one advantage of whānau order actually driving this, because the whānau order system they do actually have a data system. So baby steps, we are getting there. There's nothing kind of enduring and sustainable just yet.
Thank you. Perhaps one more for you, and then one for Justin. This one is from a medic. Grappling with a complex issue such as this for our Pacific people here in Aotearoa, in Australia, and back home in the islands. Do we start within our own islands for autonomy, or do we move as a collective? If as a collective, how do we maintain our sovereignty and values as well as navigating unique issues in each nation? I know you've been doing some work with SPC, Andrew. Do you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, everything starts local. It has to, if it doesn't work local, it doesn't work. So, so everything starts local first, and then you go, okay, is there things, are there things here that others can use from? But everything starts local because it has to work. That's where it has to work, right? And so I think the role of umbrella organisations and the collaboration is to explore what can be shared in terms of the system, and to speed things up, to make things more efficient, to share knowledge, but definitely not necessarily share data. Fortunately, the technology is there now that data doesn't have to move, right? We can move the analytic tool to go and see the data, right? And we can actually, and there are the technology is there that the people holding the data can control they hold it, and they can control who can look at it and what they can do with it. So I think the most important thing is to start local and then try to build something that could be scalable or at least repeatable in other environments. And so that way, things could, the knowledge could spread, the methods can spread, but also, should the need arise, everything's comparable. And that's really, really important. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that the WHO would like, of course. But if everything's comparable, everything's getting measured the same way, then it makes cooperation across Pacific nations so much easier.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Justin, I'm going to come to you now and give you an opportunity to make any final remarks. Unfortunately, I have to bring this conversation to a conclusion shortly. Justin?
No, thank you, Dr. Colin, for, again, arranging for these discussions to happen. Much appreciated. And thank you also, Andrew, and our Professor Kukutai earlier on. You certainly have given us a lot of information, a lot of food for thought for us to look at this in a more enlightened way, because it is certainly concerning, and hopefully we can push it up the list of priorities, because given our limited capacities, things like this sometimes may not be given the full attention as it should. And I think this just highlights the importance of this work and what we need to do in order to try to protect our people and the data that we have for them and going forward into the future. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Just again, I'm very thankful for having participated in this today, and it has certainly expanded on my knowledge anyway in relation to these issues, and it's hopefully we can then take this forward to strengthen what we have here in Niue.
Well, Justin, thank you very much for your contribution today. We'll come to you, Andrew, and then I'll just give people some updates on where we might head. Andrew, final word from you.
Thank you. It was an honour and a privilege to be invited and to talk in front of such esteemed guests. I think there are real strengths in our collaboration. There's real strengths in our shared learning. And if we do this together, we can do it quickly and we can do it well. So I hope this is the beginning of some ongoing collaboration between our individual Pacific nations.
Thank you, Andrew. As I say, Tahu has presented a kind of contextual background development with Māori data sovereignty. You've pointed out some practical issues and suggestions, and we've heard from Justin in respect of what happens on the island at the moment. If your question was not answered, the team will scrutinize these and we'll make sure we get an answer to you by email. So let me thank you again on behalf of all of us at our centre. We're pleased to have brought this with you. It's only the beginning of the conversation, and plenty for particularly Niueans in the call to think about. I note, Dean Rex, that you're on the call from London. Nice to have you. And indeed, anyone else who are interested in helping our beloved island take these issues forward. Our role, of course, is to bring the right people to share this information with you. In terms of the next webinar, it's in August. And Jess Parsisi will facilitate that particular webinar, and it's dedicated to Niuean knowledge systems, Niuean ways of knowing, traditional knowledge, those kinds of issues. And so we'll get back to you on the details of that event with Jess. For today, again, you will see in the chat the Minister has kindly thanked you, Andrew, and Professor Kukutai, and of course our own Solicitor General Justin, for your contributions today. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time. We hope this has been an interesting and learning experience. I certainly data sovereignty is not something I'm particularly across, so I've learned some things today. So, whawela hi mtolo osi ne whalataha mai he awhiawhi, a manaki kua mawhala e whekau he hatau tolo osi e mga awhiawhi nei, whalawhala hea tu kia koe ma iki pule mo e tau matakainanga ne whanono mai he motu Māori hatau tolo ko Niue. Whawela hi mhaki. Thank you again, everyone. We'll speak to you next time. Ka kite.